There's something I've actually always wanted to talk to you about this, and we've never talked about this yet, so this is a good time to do it. When I was coming up through school, there was this sense that, not a sense, it was explicitly stated by teachers, by art world people, that there was this massive shift in the abstract expressionist period, like the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, away from figuration. And at least in the American conversation, it basically, I don't know, somehow ends with Thomas Eakins and then shifts immediately to like Dada or something like that. And then we're into Jackson Pollock, and like that's where it's going.
The plug was pulled there and it was done.
Right. And to an extent, I understand that, because certain like atelier style or certain training methodologies were no longer favored in like university systems or in college systems, or and then some of them somehow maybe anyway, there just seemed to be less and less opportunity. So I think you mentioned this in one of your previous podcasts, and I'd say it as well. When I was coming up in New Jersey in the 80s, 90s, before I went to art college, there was just nothing to be found in terms of like serious art training. In a figurative sense. You could take a class here or there with like a lady in her basement, but that person wasn't a professional artist. They were more of like an arts educator, which is great and gets you started, but it doesn't get you like deadly serious right away. So but my view on this is a complicated one, because I feel like the figurative arts and the methodologies never really went anywhere. They went somewhere in terms of like the most popular culture, meaning like what was supported and pronounced by the galleries and by our government as like what's unique and what's going on. But the public and the population and the general art student, like still like 5 out of 10, if not 7 out of 10 art students, were still completely enamored with realism, with naturalism, with mannerism or something like that, with some form of representation.
Totally.
And so there is this historical note that just says like figuration became irrelevant over this time. And while Norman Rockwell was working during that period, that didn't matter that much. And my argument to that is like, yes, it did. Yes, it did for, so many people. And anyway, so I wanted to get your view on that. Like, do you?
Yeah, that's a great topic.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually, so I agree with you. I believe that narrative is a false one.
Yeah.
I don't think. First of all, we could back up a little bit. I think the line between the idea of there's a clean dividing line between abstraction and representation is a red herring. It's an intellectual red herring. Everything is abstraction.
Yeah, right. It's a false dichotomy anyway.
It's a false dichotomy. It doesn't exist. All art is an abstraction, right? Unless you would say I'm a work of art, which that'd be fine. You could say I'm a work of art if you like.
Brian.
But you get the point. Like everything that we make is an abstraction. It's abstract. Literally means pulled away from, right? Its source, right? Its source is it's moving away from its source.
Yeah. So the only artwork which wouldn't be an abstraction would be something that you perfectly mistake for reality. And that doesn't mean like a convincing movie or like a convincing animation. That means you accidentally, perfectly mistake it for reality.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Right. That would not be an abstraction.
Yeah.
That would be the thing that it is.
Yeah. And so even a hyper-real sculpture is an abstraction because it doesn't move and it doesn't breathe and it doesn't live. So until those become automatons where they do live, that would be a realistic sculpture. Yeah.
Well, I mean, on a philosophical level, you could say that all of experience is an abstraction.
Right.
Because it isn't the thing itself, right? It's a mediated interpretation.
This is Plato's cave in a way, right?
Right. Now that doesn't mean that there aren't obviously gradations within this, right? So abstract expressionism is we recognize it. See, here's the thing that people say, well, it's not figurative, it's not representational. No, it is. Because when you look at it, what's implied is his hand moving over the canvas.
Right. Yeah.
That so is the point.
It's made.
It's
right.
Right. And the implication, like the representation is the representation of a movement of a man in space. Right? Now that may seem like a little bit of a like a justification for the argument I'm trying to make, but it's real. That is, you can't, in other words, it's kind of like, here's a closer example would be when you look at a Rodin and you see the mark of his, you see his hand, right? The print of his hand on the surface. What's implied there is not just the thing that it's representing in its physical form, but it's in its absent form as well, right? It's representing the person who made it. So there are various elements of representation.
Yeah. I think there's a philosophical kind of thread. I'm not a good philosophy person, but there's an idea that says something like, if you find a stopwatch like open on the beach, you could never mistake that for natural. Meaning like there's no clues visually in nature that would suggest that a stopwatch wasn't made by a person. So the only way you can understand that is by understanding that men make things or people make things, and so that's I think that's kind of what you're saying, is that no matter how Barnett Newman you become, you can't understand that painting was anything but made by a person, by mankind.